So there's the word which occurs again and again in Parshas Hazinu is the word sur, rock. You notice that again and again. Sur Chaim Parsha, but it's a very frequent refrain in Hazinu. Rav Hirsch says that this is actually the key to understanding, or one of the key words that understands the whole of the Shira, because really what it is, the Shira Hazinu is a song, but it's meant to be a reflection on both the past and the present and the future. And the idea of it is Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Bnei Yisrael, you need to understand that when things go in a certain direction, and perhaps not as you wish them to go in your future, you need to understand why. You need to understand why these things happen and why the cycles of Jewish history are as they are. That's really the main themes of the song. So it's very deep, and it's about the Jewish future as well as the past. What is the word sur significance? Rav Hirsch says that when we say the word sur, according to Chazal in the Sifri, has two phrases, two meanings. It's the one who is strong, right? Rock, like takif means strong, right? And also the word sur is tsayar, to form, right? Like sur also means to form, like an image, okay, right? That's how it is, yeah? Sur is a rock. That's really what sur obviously naturally normally is. But it also means to form something or to make an image. You find the word lotsur also as a siege, to besiege a city. Lotsur al whatever, we see that a few times. Right? Lotsur al says earlier in the Devarim. Okay, so he says also that, and he says the word also. He knows the words matsuda means a fortress, right? Which of course is matsada. It's a fortress. That's what it is. Not masada. It's matsada, right? Yeah, which comes from the root sud. It's the same thing. There's always, you can have these interchangeable words as well. It's a fortified place. It shuts people in. But that's one meaning. So there's that sense of strength, right? So you have the idea of Hatsur Tomim Paula, Hashem is unchanging, right? Fixed Sur Yisrael, right? And then you also have the idea of to form, right? So where do we find surahs forming? With after the Egel Hazor, so it's formed. It's cast and it's melted down. It's made into a form, right? The V'yotzer is beforehand. I think that's how he makes the Egel Hazor, right? It's made, it's formed in that way. No, it comes in and then how it's been, so whatever. But it's the idea of forming something to shape something. Okay. So what we have is the idea of it being permanent, absolutely always there, right? And also the idea of being able to overcome absolutely everything. Hashem is both the definition of permanence and also the one who is able himself to form anything and everything. That's what the notion of Tzur in the context of Hashem is. It's almost like a double-edged sword, two halves of the same thing. Because Hashem is described as the rock, therefore we can depend on him in every way. But we also know that therefore he is able to shape and does shape and form everything according to his will. If you know what I mean, it's part of the same. It's two parts of the same thing. There's a famous anecdote that in the Declaration for the State of Israel, it starts off. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it uses the word Sur Yisrael in the Declaration. Something like mitoch bitachon b'tzur Yisrael, something like trust in the rock of Israel, and that's because, you might say, sadly, there was a big debate about including the name of Hashem in the Declaration of Israel, because of course there was a bit of everyone was on the same page when it came to their. So the compromise they came to was to use the word Sur Yisrael, because then those who wanted it translate it as capital R, the rock of Israel, would use it that way, and those who didn't would translate it as some sort of generic, which of course it isn't. We know exactly what Sur Yisrael means. But anyway, But the thing was that the from people who signed the Declaration of State of Israel they sort of won in the end, because I think it's Rabbi the Maimon. I think it was one of the signatures in the Declaration of State of Israel. And at the bottom, when he signed his name, and then he wrote Be'ezras Hashem, like it's part of the signature. So he managed to get the Shem Hashem. What?
Yeah, but it's
no, he managed to get it. He managed to get the name of Hashem on the Declaration. So that's what the. Yeah, that's what it says. Oh, it does say that. And then you've got the Hasimas.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I was trying to see if I could.
Wait a minute. I was trying to see that. See the bottom, right? Okay, you can work. You can work. Yeah. Okay, so Rav Hirsch is like this. Rav Hirsch is like this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So right. So okay. So he talks about the idea of B'tchu Hashem, Kibbutz Hashem, Sorry Lomim. Okay. He carries on to talk about this further. Yeah. So he says like this. He says when the word sur is used in relation to Klal Yisrael, you have a dual certainty. He says the Bnei Yisrael, Klal Yisrael know that Hashem is the everlasting support for our existence in history. That's what we know for the word sur. Hashem wants us to exist, therefore we do, we never perish. But also he wants us to exist in a certain way. We always have to. We are meant to live. We are meant to live in such a way that, with an understanding that ultimately everything that happens to us and our fate and destiny as individuals, as part of the Bnei Yisrael, ultimately are there to realize Hashem's objectives for the world. And in that sense, he calls it, they're nothing but the formative hammer blows of Hashem's ruling power which shapes the world. That's what it means, Kibbutz Hashem Tzorei Lomim. We recognize that he is in control. We also recognize that ultimately everything in history is directed to that purpose. And that's why we specifically use that word in the context of words that Alenos uses, of course, it's the Kadin, Hatsur Tomim Palo, it's an Avai, yeah? Hatsur Tomim Palo, Kichol D'Rochov Mishpalo. So we say we accept, there's an acceptance of judgment in that sense. So that he says that is what it is. It defines the Shira because it's the relationship between us and Hashem and how that relationship affects us and how through us, particularly us as a people, Hashem, if you like, crafts the destination of history. This is these are quite deep ideas, but that really is the movement through the Shira itself. So that's really how he says you understand what the Shira is. Now Rav Wolbe in his in Ali Shur, exactly, Ali Shur has a section where he describes and links the Shira to Sukkos. Okay, and we will always name Hasidim. Well, no, either before Yom Kippur or after, right? Or is it Shabbos before? And you have the pasuk says like this at the beginning of the Shira. It talks about how when HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided who and where the peoples of the world should live, right? So it talks about Bahafrido b'nei Odom, the Dor HaFloga after the Tower of Babel, right? So the dispersion of the peoples throughout the world, okay? But it talks about Kichelek Hashem Amoy, right? But ultimately, all the decisions, so to speak, that Hashem makes when it comes to where nations will live and who they will be and everything else, ultimately all designed for one purpose, because through Shem will come the Bnei Yisrael, right? The Klal Yisrael will come through that. It's all designed going in that direction. And what happens to them? He sort of he found them, or he found, Rashi understands that he found them faithful in the desert when we left Mitzrayim, of a Sohu, and in a place of which means in a desolate place, they continued and kept strong in their faith, right? As we know very famously, the pasuk Lechtech Acharai B'Midbar, right? That's what the pasuk means. That is the definition of our emunah, the fact that we trusted in Hashem and Lechtech Acharai. Hashem says, praises Klal Yisrael. Yirmiyahu Hanavi says this is the beginning of Sefer Yirmiyahu. Lechtech Acharai B'Midbar B'Eretz Lo Zerua. You followed me. It was a huge risk going into the desert, but you followed me, Hashem says. Then it says the following words: Yisovevenu, Yuvoinenehu, Yitzrenu Ki'ishonenu. Now, these words are very important to understand because these words directly relate to Sukkos. Rashi says, what does it mean, Yisovevenu? Shom Sivavom Ve'ekifom Ba'anonim. He surrounded them with the Ananei covered. The Sivavom B'Degolim Abaruchos. They were surrounded with flags around all four sides. And also the mountain, of course, was also held suspended over them, we know, like a barrel. Yeah, right. But the key point Rashi is coming across here is this idea of Hashem surrounding us in the midbar. But then it also says Yavoinanei, which means he built them, right? The Bnei Yisrael, right? Rashi says but Torah and Bina with understanding. And then finally, Yitzrenu, he will guard them, protect them. Ishoin Einoi. Ishoin Einoi is like the pupil of the eye. That's what it means, right? Rashi says the shachar, the way you see from your eye. Okay. So let's understand why this is how this works. Rav Wolbe says like this, that the fundamental identity of the Bnei Yisrael is revealed in the Midbar, in the desert, right? Very far away from anyone else, from anywhere else, right? And he says the idea is that in the context of the desert, right, there is a sense of a world that is unformed, that is nothing there, desolate. There's nothing there. It's a completely empty place, and that is a place where every power or strength or people or anyone who lives in that area is sort of striving to claim it as their own. There's no established people there. That's what a desert represents. It's empty, and that means every individual or every group there is saying, "Ani emloch." So I will reign here. This is my place. What does Hashem do? There it says Yimtso'ehu. Hashem finds us, so to speak, in that place, crafts us in that empty place, and builds us from the ground up. That's why we're built as a nation. We leave Mitzrayim as a people, but the work takes place in the desert. It's when we arrive at the other side that we already really formed into a nation. And how does that happen? Yeah, that happens through the two processes of Yisovevenu and Yevonenu, surrounding us and then building us. Okay, and we'll see how this works. He says like this. He says that the Anani Kovet protected us. That's what they did, right? That's what they were for. They also he brings it also represents not just that protection alone, but also the fact that we were surrounded in every way in order to enable us to develop, to grow, right? The idea of the Degolim, right, is also the same thing. You have that individuality of each of the Shvatim also being able to develop, and they're surrounded by in that way. He says, the Gemara Menachos famously says, Chaviv in Yisrael shesibavon HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzvahs. Why are we cherished? Because Hashem surrounds us with mitzvahs. And there's this famous idea that the mitzvahs that we have protect us. They're the wall around us to prevent us doing the wrong things. You wear tefillin, and you have tzitzis and a mezuzah. All these things are protective. And they are all there in order to make sure that if we have all these things surrounding us, we won't go in the wrong way. We won't do the wrong thing, right? And also, of course, they uplift us. The people will see. They see the tefillin. That's what it refers to. Similarly, you find with the tzitzis. Tzitzis like techeles. The color of techeles refers to the underneath hakol. You see the sky, etc., etc. Same thing. You can see hakol, right? Okay. And with mezuzah as well, you find the same idea. There's this. The Gemara brings the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, where when Onkelos, who wrote the Targum, wanted to be Megaya, right? So he was a very close relative of the Caesar in Rome, and Caesar wanted to get him back. We don't want to lose him to the Jews, so he sent people after him to try and bring him back, whatever. And each one of them he managed to make. They converted too, right? And finally, the last group came along, and he puts his hands on the mezuzah, or they notice the mezuzah. They don't say anything, because the Caesar system don't say anything, because you're just going to fall like the others, you become Jewish as well. So didn't say anything, you can get into debate with him. But as they go even the door, they see the mezuzah, and they say, "What's a mezuzah?" And then he says to them like this. He says, generally speaking, the way of the world is Melech Bosad Adam Yoshev Mibifnim, Va'avod of Mishamer Mosom Bachutz. Most people, so the king is inside and the servants are outside. Hashem is the other way around. The servants are inside and Hashem protects us on the outside, right? As it says, Hashem Yishmotzeis Chaveacham. Hashem is outside and we're inside, even though usually with the king, it's the other way around. And immediately they converted to, right? That's how they went. But it says Rav Wolbe like this. This Gemara tells us a fascinating and vital thing. It is like Hashem is literally placing us on the inside and protecting us on the outside. Okay, and he says that is the idea of Yisovevenu, surrounding us. It's more than just protection in a physical sense. It's a protection in order to enable us to grow. In other words, you only surround something which is worth protecting. You don't protect something which is not worth protecting, right? Why does Hashem surround us with mitzvahs? Because there is an internal world there. There is something inside that is worth one taking. Oh, okay, because that's one take. No, he's not. He's taking. What? No, he's done this.
We haven't got to the writing yet.
Oh, it's okay.
So-
Why was it so easy to convert people at that time, whereas now even people who are from
It's interesting.
well.
He must have been. Listen, let's think of it. Put it like this. Uncle Sager must have been an incredibly Uncle Sager must have been an incredibly charismatic individual.
Just his face is enough.
No, I mean he left the Romans. He ends up writing the commentary on the commentary on the. Now you've got to write really good notes, okay? Okay. He ends up writing like the parish on the Torah, right? It's quite a remarkable thing. I don't know if it means it happened overnight, that they actually, they ended up. They were sold. Yeah. Well, there was a question there. In periods in history, we would question whether we accept Gerim. Yeah. Time of Shlomo Melech, they didn't accept any Gerim. Yeah. You have to have this conversation. You have to have this conversation with Gerim. In the base there, sometimes they even say to us if there's something to delay in the process, they'll turn around and say, we've got to get on with it. Because once Mashiach comes, there's no more Gerim. Really? Finished. And they say it in real serious. Yeah, they weren't. They say to us, they say to us, we've got to get on with it. Listen, I don't want to miss the boat.
They were told to
But also, we can't forget that at that time it was more common to have spirituality anyway.
Yeah,
In the sense of it wasn't
Well,
from zero to something.
That's true.
They had a belief structure anyway.
Yeah,
And this was saying what you believe in isn't.
That's right.
evangelism as well.
Correct. Yeah.
The Romans, so the end of the
Just before
the end of the
Christianity.
whole the end of the Baishing, about 2,000 plus years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
He was indeed as well.
Yeah.
Now the point is like this. Okay, so now that we've established, right? Now that we've established that there is an external world and there's an internal world, right? The external world exists itself, of course, and it in many ways tries to pull us away from the internal essence of who we should be and who we are, right? And the difficulty is that internal world is something which is very difficult to even describe. That's how he says it. Unless you're inside it, you can't even really connect to it. Unless you need to know what you're looking for. He says that those who are able to connect with what is bifnim, the internal, the spirituality, the essence, right? It needs a protection. Okay, and that is the yesod avenu in our pasuk. It's a shmira on the externally in order to strengthen us inside. But that is not the only. That is not all we need, because we also need the yevona nehu. Yevona nehu is building in terms of Torah, in terms of understanding. That needs to work together as well. When Rashi says that Hashem surrounded us with the Ananei HaKavod, he says that is exactly what we're doing on Sukkos. And it's not, in other words, I think he's going further than, the Pasuk says, Kibbutz Sukkot Shabbat Yisrael Israel, right? Rabbi Lezer says that means the Ananei HaKavod. That's why we build a Sukkah, because the Ananei HaKavod we were surrounded with, right? But he says, there is no difference. The way he phrases it is Ein Shum Nafka Mina, Im Ananei HaKavod Eilu Ruchaniyim Hoyu Agim Utfanas Kalafa. It makes no difference whether it is there's the spiritual essence of the Ananei Kavod or you're sitting in your actual sukkah. Makes no difference, right? The whole idea, he says, of the Yomim Noraim and all these Yomim Tovim in Tishri essentially have one thread running through them, which is consistent the whole way through, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkos, and that is the construction of the spiritual core of Klal Yisrael. That's what it is. That's what we are doing this month. That's what we've always done during the month of Tishri, and that essentially is what is going on here. The final stage is to somehow build a home for that spiritual core. So we're working on it through Rosh Hashanah and Kippur the whole way through, but it's got to live somewhere. It can't exist in the ether. It's got to have a home somewhere, right? And that home needs to be somewhere protective that will look after it and that will enable it to thrive. It can't just exist just floating around. It's going to disappear. It's going to dissipate, right? That's why the final stage is Sukkos, right? Hashem the protection that Hashem gives us and has always given us and has surrounded us from that beginning with the Ananei HaKovod, we continue to feel that protection today, and specifically on Sukkos. We take what we've gained at Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, hopefully, and we put that inside, so to speak, inside the Sukkah. And that's what he says. So he says there's one condition for this. The condition is that you have to be able, in order to feel it and to really experience it, you have to be able to leave your house. You have to go into Toras Hara. So it's okay, even indoor sukkahs to leave your house. It's okay. I'm not right, because let's see if the person have an indoor sukkah. It's okay. You'll spend more time in it. You'll spend more time in it because you've got. Spend more time in it because you're in. No, it's not. No, it's because it's conception.
Not spending enough time in there.
Oh, you're going away. You had this, didn't you? Are you going away as well?
It's a better soccer. It's outside.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Now it's better.
Yeah.
I wanted to stay here. Soccer's not right.
When are you going?
Sunday.
We'll discuss this
15
after.
minutes.
We'll discuss.
1,000 people on Zoom. I wanted to
Discuss part of their
I
end.
really, really, the construction of Israel started really better. If you think.
Yes. That's true. That's true. That's true. I think it means, that's 100% true. And that there are twin pathways here. There's a trajectory from Pesach Shavuos and Sukkos. They operate together as a unit, in that unit, right? Sukkos famously is like it brings together both. There are two twin pathways which converge when you get to Sukkos, right? You've got Pesach Shavuos and Sukkos, the end of Sukkos, and you've got Rosh Hashanah and the end of Sukkos. You ever noticed that? So Sukkos is the link. It links everything together. And that's why it's got both elements. That's why Sukkos has the Pesach element, as in the Midbar and the journey and the Sukkah, right? As in the Sukkahs and the Midbar, you understand? And it's also got the sense of this idea of building a home for the spiritual core and the idea that we've gained over Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's both.
I remember talking about giving ourselves over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all the themes of Sukkos. You can trace this through, I think, all the way through Sukkos. You can basically trace both pathways, if that makes sense, right? So the point he says is like this: is that when we say the only way you see from the pasuk in Ha'azinu is that the Yisov Avenu can only work when Yimtso'ehu be'eretz midbar, right? That Hashem finds us in that desert, and that is why on Sukkos as well we have to leave. We have to go somewhere foreign in a place that we're not naturally comfortable in. Okay, and that is where we will be able to feel that sense of the protection of Hashem, the idea and the fact that the mitzvahs protect us, and build that central spiritual core, the Yisov Avenu Yavon Anehu. He says, if we were living in a place that was, and we felt entirely secure, we wouldn't be able to get there. And therefore, he says that's why it is we have to go outside in this way. Okay, he phrases it like this. He's got a very powerful phrase here. He says, Kiruchanius pnimis. That means an internal spirituality. Enos suveles es hashkida al binyan olamenu hachitzoni. It's quite really, right? If you devote too much time to building your external world, right, so your material world, then it's simple. The spiritual core can't cope with it. It doesn't have any place to go. It doesn't have any place to develop, and that's why you leave your home to do this. Because otherwise you could say, well, I can live in my protected home and I can feel spiritual. It doesn't work like that, right? It doesn't work. It will not develop. It will not develop in that way. So he brings many other points here, but we don't really have so much time to go through them. Let me just bring one more point, because he brings out something powerful from the David Hashem Ori, and that links with other things we've discussed about the David Hashem Ori in a way. Talked about how that's I gave a show on it, I think, before Rosh Hashanah, about how the themes are repetitive in the David Hashem. It's repeated again. It's all doubled. Everything's doubled, right? So this idea of working on it and say, and you're working yourself through the whole month of Elul, right? The David HaMelech, we have to remember always, this you can trace to the whole of Sefer Tehillim in the most incredible way. David HaMelech is always threatened, right? His whole life, he's under threat. His whole life, he has sorrows, right? The whole way through, okay? And everyone is trying to fight him, his own family, because, we're familiar with the story of David HaMelech's life. He has a really, really difficult time in that sense, right? How does he survive? he survives with the words Hashem Ori V'ishi. Because I know Hashem Ori V'ishi, Hashem is, he lives in that internal world. He lives in a place where Hashem Ori V'ishi, right? Ori is Rosh Hashanah, Yishi is Yom Kippurim, right? And that means that even when he's fighting the external battles, and even when he's fighting all of those things that threaten his stability and try and drag him down, he knows that really he's there. He's in the, he's not really there. He's really living in the spiritual plane, right? And in that place, he's able therefore to say, Ki etzpeneni b'sukkah v'yomra, yastireni b'seisa. That's why David HaMelech can say, I live in a sukkah. Hashem will protect me in the sukkah. That was where, from where we learn that the David Hashem Ori has a connection to sukkahs, right? It's because he never leaves, and because he always has that connection with Hashem. Therefore, he is always living effectively. He is living protected in that sukkah, right? In that sukkah, right? That's what he does. So he says that. He brings out. Again, he goes into the Arba Minim as well. We don't know. Again, we don't have time. But there's one point I wanted to bring out from the end of the posuk. At the very end of this piece, he says, if you look at Yitzrenu ki ishoin eino, so what does it mean that Hashem protects us like the pupil of his eye? Yeah. So he says, Aklal Yisrael hanivna bozeh, that when Klal Yisrael is built in this way through the external Yisov Avenu and then the internal spiritual core being built up, keeping that protected. It's like with the people of Hashem's eye. It's as if, he says, the Or HaEloki, that spiritual light from Hashem, goes from Klal Yisrael into the world. He says there is no greater representation of the essence of Klal Yisrael being built here. And he says, that we experience this every year. We go through this process every year where we can go through this pathway between Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, and Sukkos. We can take and experience those heightened levels of Ruchnias, then bring them into the Sukkah straight away, so we can protect them and keep them and live it and live how we are supposed to live, how we're meant to live. And in that sense, it's as if we become the, so to speak, the actual light, almost Hashem's eyes, that goes through there to the rest of the world. And it occurred to me that really this fits very nicely with what we started with Rav Hirsch, because the idea of tsur, right? The idea of tsur being, what does it mean? Tzrenu is really similar to tsur, the root that. Yeah, tzrenu means to protect. So it's again got a relationship, I think, to crafting, or I think it's related to the same as the word tsur, meaning a rock.
So,
what? I think so. It must be related in that way, where the words are too close. And therefore, ultimately, what we're saying is that through the Shira we learn how the passage of history is defined by Klal Yisrael, right? That's what we're in this world to make a difference, and what we do affects the rest of humanity in this way. And particularly at this time of the year, when we feel that closeness to Hashem, that is where we can sense this more than any other time of the year. This idea of people of Hashem's eye. We're right there at the heart of everything in the world. Everything that transpires is in some way related to us, to our people, something we experience many times in our history. And that is something which is very much a piece of this, the central focus of this Shiur. And that is, and there's much more to say, but we don't really have. The last pasuk of the Shiur is Harninu Goyim Amoy. Harninu Goyim Amoy. The last pasuk of the Shiur is Harninu Goyim Amoy. That the nations will end up one day sort of praising, or it's telling them, praise the people of Bnei Israel, right? Because one day one day Hashem will avenge the blood of his servants. It's like his people themselves atone for the land, all that. So these are deep ideas, but it hopefully gives us some inspiration going into Sukkos, which we don't normally have time to think about. Thank you very much to the family bar for hosting, especially on the especially on the